Welcome back to 21 Minute Reads with me, Maya D. In these 5-minute videos, I share with you my 3 takeaways from my current reading. Right now, I'm reading The Black Dancing Body by Brenda Dixon Gottschild. As a part of the Read 21 in 21 challenge, I read 21 minutes per day as a way to ground myself, to love myself, to learn something, to provide myself with some consistency in an ever-changing world. As you can see, I'm still on my East Coast home, so reading is definitely my stability right now as I navigate this thing called life. This week, I read pages 90 through 104, and I know if you've been following my videos, it might seem a little tricky because I didn't have my glasses on when I was looking at some of the page numbers in the earlier video, so I misquoted, but I fixed it. This week, for real, I read pages 90 through 104. And here are my 3 takeaways. Takeaway number 1, grace. So this idea of experimental movement, this term experimental movement is sometimes given to white bodies, white choreographers when they use dancers and movers that are not trained in that choreographer's aesthetic. There's a certain level of grace that's offered to the dancers and to the production because there's an understanding that these dancers, these movers are operating outside of their preferred technique. But this grace isn't always given to dancers that live in black and brown bodies. Sometimes when these dancers are moving outside of their technique, they are not given that same grace and they are identified as black dancers rather than the grace of saying, hey, you know what, you're working really hard. I see that you're trying to grow. They're just labeled as bad dancers. So I want you and us to make sure that we are giving grace consistently across the board to people that are moving outside of their norm and looking for growth. Another idea that was brought up in the reading, in this week's reading, was the mantle, a polycentric and polyrhythmic movement. So sometimes there's this over-sexualization given to movement that makes use of isolation. So when you're moving your rib cage and isolation of your torso, separate from your belly and your hips and your pelvis, when you're making that isolation, sometimes it is seen as sexual. But rather than promiscuity, I'm reading from my notes, that some would associate it with this isolated movement, what if the adults are actually encouraging those children, those black and brown children, to carry on these values of polycentrism and polyrhythmic movement? What if these elders that are encouraging these children to learn these new dances are really saying, hey, you know what? We understand that the values that we are encouraging in you will teach you that these movements operate outside of more than just sex. What if the elders that are encouraging and the adults that are encouraging these children to move in these ways with these isolations and things like that, these circling of the hips and things like that, what if they are in fact reminding the children of the value that they have, that their bodies are more than just sex? Just an idea. I don't know. My last takeaway. Takeaway number 3. 20th century bodies reflect 20th century, I guess we should say 21st century bodies reflect 21st century values. We are no longer solely living in communities that their values are only reflective of that community, because there's globalization going on, right? So we're informed by many other things, right? So you have to take those things into consideration. Anybody given time and access can adapt to and fit the desired values. Hence, why we train children at a young age to take on these values. I hope that you learned something. I hope that you have some comments for me. Drop them in the comments down there. Make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe and turn on your alerts. And I will see you next week. Have a great day.